All right, we're just going to real quickly go over this homework and remind each other of the different properties of when we're solving. For x, for our equation solving review, this first conversation was about x on either side. Whether you subtract 3x or 4x, it doesn't matter. Having x on the right is uncomfortable for some. They prefer to rewrite it like this, which is fine, but this is a good answer too. For number 2, when we look at this one, we want to make sure that number 1, we bubble wrap our expressions, and that when we use cross products, those parentheses help us to distribute. Some fancy people can cancel this out first. If you would like to, you can divide by 5, divide by 5. That'll save you from dividing by 5 down here. Think about it. Cross products. Absolute value, you have to remember to split your equation into the positive and the negative, and that's going to give you 2 very different solutions, but when you plug each of those into here and simplify, you get positive 11 as an output. Here's some factoring that you can do to solve a quadratic. Here's a strategy of taking the square root of both sides, and when you do that, every time you draw the square root, you have to remember your plus or minus. It's not always going to come out evenly. So I went ahead and divided by 3 first. That was fine. Added 5 to each side. We're going to go ahead and leave things in radical form because irrational numbers, we're compromising the true value, and we don't want to do that. Here was one that couldn't be factored, so I went ahead and listed my A, B, and C values, making sure that my B, when I square it, I get a positive B squared, minus 4 times A times C all over 2A. Nothing here can be simplified, so these 2 answers here, plus or minus, is going to give me 2 values. Quadratic, subtract 12, this is where we first say hello to I. Whenever I have a negative under the radical sign, back in Algebra 1, you got to say no real root. Guess what? In Algebra 2, we made something up. So I is here to save the day. Plus or minus 2 when we factor the 12, or we break that down into 4 and 3. We could take the square root of 4, which is 2. Square root of negative 1 is I, leaving me with root 3. Taking a look at number 9, we're going to subtract 6 from each side. Wrap it up and square it. Of course, I'm nervous about this negative 2. So when I go ahead and I square it, I get a positive. I do my math all right, but guess what? When I come over here and I check, I get something that is not true, which means this is an extraneous solution, which means there's no solution to that equation. No value of x is going to make that true. All right, here's the number 1. I predict you made a mistake. Did you bubble wrap your x minus 1? So then when you squared it, did you get x squared minus 2x plus 1? We're hoping that you remembered when you square that, you get a trinomial from that binomial square. All right, so you're going to set everything equal to 0, combine my terms. It's a quadratic. Hooray, it factors. When I go ahead and look at my values for x, I get 2, I get positive 6 and negative 1. When I come over here and check, positive 6 works just fine. Not so much for negative 1. I get 2 is equal to negative 2, which doesn't happen, which means this guy is extraneous, which means this is the only solution set. So some people would like you to write it officially like this. All right, for number 11, we'll go ahead and add x to both sides, and then we'll square both sides, removing that 1/2 power. We'll take everything over here, and then we'll go ahead and factor minus 4 minus 1. And then I get x is equal to 4 and 1. And both of them check. So those are going to be our answers. This is a cool one. We're going to go ahead and rewrite this as the square root of x minus 2 cubed. My first step is going to be to bubble wrap and square each side. When I do that, I'm left with x minus 2 cubed equals 125 squared. So then my next step is then to take the cube root of that value. Cube root of 125 is 5. 5 squared is 25. No need for a plus or minus here because of the cubed root. So x has a value of 27. How'd you do? All right, your next part of your homework was 6/8. I found in my common denominator x minus 4 and an x. Once I was able to set them equal to each other, then I could go ahead and cross off this common denominator, solve, and check. Number 2, I went ahead and found my common denominators as x plus 3 times x. Make sure that you add the opposite so that this negative gets distributed. When I had this common denominator, I could go ahead and distribute this negative, solve my numerators only. Unfortunately, my answer of -3 gives me a 0 up here and here. Therefore, there's no solution. All right, taking a look at numbers 3 and 4. My common denominator is going to be 3 and x. When I made a list of my factors of my fractions, a 2, a 3, and a 2, and an x. So my least common denominator needed to have a 3 and a 2 and an x. That's how I got 6x here. Multiplied this first fraction by 3x over 3x. Multiplied my second fraction by x over x, and my third fraction by 6 over 6. This common denominator can be crossed off. So I have 3x plus x squared equals 108. I turn that into a quadratic in standard form. I factor it, and I can go ahead and I checked those denominators, they're good. I'm going to factor this into x plus 3x minus 3. Here's x minus 3, here's x plus 3 minus 3. This is the only factor that needed another value. So here I have x plus 3 over x plus 3. So that's going to give me this 2x squared is equal to, I'm going to have to do some multiplication here, plus 18. This denominator, now that it's common, can be crossed off. First outer inner last, combine like terms. And I'm going to go ahead and bring everything, this might be a little confusing, but because of my 2 x's are here, the first thing I did was I subtracted x squared from each side, giving me x squared. My 3 x's were negative. When I add them to each side, they become positive. When my 18 was positive, when I subtract it from each side, it becomes negative because I wanted my 0 on this side, so my x squared stayed positive. I factored, I checked, and guess what? 3 was not allowed. So see you there. For number 5, my least common denominator had to include a 2x minus 3 and a 5 minus 2x. I multiplied each fraction by what they needed. And then I was able to cross off that denominator, solve for my numerators. When I put this value back in to my fraction, I was left with 18/4, 9/2. So that was fine with that in both of my in both of my denominators. Factor. Don't forget to add the opposite. So here's that negative we need to watch. Once my denominators match, this guy needed an x minus 1 This guy needed a 2, and this guy needed an x plus 1. Once they matched, I can cross them off. X minus 1 plus negative 10 is equal to 2x minus 3. Solve for x, and when I went ahead and I checked it, a negative 13 is not going to cause any problems up here. All right, ready for the back? Number 7, I needed a least common denominator of a 5 and an x. This guy needed an x. This guy needed a 5. This guy needed an x. Cross off that common denominator and address my numerators only. 3x squared plus 20 is equal to 4x squared plus x. Factor, solve, check, we're good. This denominator factors here. This denominator is the same. This denominator factors here. So my least common denominator, I need an x, and I need an x minus 5. So the only fraction that needs something is this x minus 5. I bubble wrapped him because this binomial multiplication problem is FOIL. Once I do that math and I combine like terms, set everything equal to 0, factor my quadratic, I look at an 8 and a 4, and I'm good to go. This one checks. Let's look at 9 and 10. I factor x squared minus 25 into plus or minus. This guy's good. I give him what he needs. Cross off my common denominators. I get x plus 5 is equal to x. I don't think so. Subtract x from each side and I get 0 is equal to 5. There's no solution to that one. It's going to make it true. I factored number 10. My least common denominator is going to be x plus 4 times x plus 2. Give everybody what they need. The 3 is good to go. This x plus 1 needs an x plus 4, and this 1 needs an x plus 4. Here's my 3 plus, here's my FOIL, first, outer, inner, last. Then I'm combining like terms, factoring, checking. This guy's good to go. All right, here's number 11. Factor. I went ahead and added the opposite, protecting that negative, giving this fraction an x plus 3 over x plus 3. Look at this fraction. He needs both. He needs an x plus 3 and an x minus 3 before I can cross that off. Here's my x squared minus 3. Here's my negative 15x or negative 5x minus 15. Here's my 2 times x is x squared. Positive 3x, negative 3x cancel out. Negative 9. Combine like terms. Set equal to 0. Don't forget how to solve this one. Just the x comes out. Here he is. So 0 is a value. But both of these check. Neither one makes those denominators 0. All right, last one, number 12. Difference of two perfect squares. And I factored, or went ahead and multiplied that. This guy needs an x plus 2 over x plus 2. Once I had those common denominators. 8x minus 8 is equal to 4 times x, and 4 times 2 is 8. When I put my 4 in up here, you might have been nervous, but 4 squared is 16. 16 minus 4 is 12. That's fine. 4 minus 2 is fine. That checks. All right. It's time to turn in your warm-up and go get your quiz. But, question, did you reflect? Where did you go wrong? What mistakes did you make? What questions would you ask me if I was there?